Hi, I'm Mat Laporte, and I'm the author of Rat's Nest. Yeah, it's kind of a corkscrew path that the book took to coming to this form. Um, I've described it to people as, well, mainly I wrote poetry previous to this, and the way I wrote poetry was to collect things, notes, and language, and then build it up kind of like a sculpture, and work it out through reading it out loud and sort of make something out of this raw material. And so I initially started writing what I wanted to be a book-length poem called Rat's Nest, and it was going to have narrative features weaving in and out of it. But basically I was thinking of it as a poem. It was also in prose. And I wrote that and worked really hard on it, and when I read it out loud, it made my brain hurt too much. And I thought, that's not good, no one's going to want to read that. And so I had to, and I also started thinking more about narrative and prose itself, and how the way I was used to working with language through poetry didn't necessarily work with narrative. And I started becoming interested in those narrative features, and what I did was pulled those out of the poem and started making stories that I saw as being part of this one story out of those narrative features. And that's what became Rat's Nest. Yeah, to me, there's sort of a latent narrative, and I compare it to this movie called The Long Goodbye. It's a Robert Altman movie, and the sort of conceit behind it, which you don't need to know to enjoy the movie, is that when Philip Marlowe wakes up in 1970s LA, he went to sleep the day before in 1950s LA. So he's traveled through time somehow and arrived in this movie. And I actually didn't know that when I first watched that movie, and loved it. And then I love the fact that there's sort of this nested or latent narrative that you don't even have to know to appreciate the movie, but it's there. Anyway, that's sort of how I see this working, is that in the first chapter, there's a 3D printed kid that's made to traverse a bottomless pit, and a side effect of him, or it traveling through the pit, is that it starts having these nightmares and hallucinations, and they start making their way back up to the surface of the planet and changing things. And then the story progresses through all these different genres and ideas, and to me those are the nightmares and hallucinations that come out of that, out of the bottomless pit. At a certain point, I just realized that I love genre, and I always have, but sort of separated my poetry writing from genre. I would let little things get in there. My first chapbook was called Demons, and sort of a tribute to horror films and all that kind of stuff. But I just realized that I really love genre, and there's no reason why I shouldn't use it. And it's sort of useful. What I found was I wrote a book of discrete poems called The Logical Revolts, which was originally what I sent you, and it had political undertones, and I felt at a certain point that I didn't trust my own convictions in that way, and that I didn't want to publish a book that I wasn't convinced of the argument of it. And in that doubt, I started writing in a way, or I needed something to allow me to write about those things, and I felt like genre gave me tools to talk about those things. So I don't exactly know how that works, but in some ways I feel like it's a more, for me, direct way to write about certain things than to actually name them or explicitly state them. So at first that's what genre gave me. I've said jokingly that horror is like the most renewable resource, and in light of recent events, I wish that wasn't true. It seems a bit smug to say that, but I do feel like there's plenty of horror in the world, and part of my questioning is trying to figure out how to deal with that. And again, I find genre mysterious and interesting. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but I do feel like there's a useful role that genre plays in sublimating our fears, giving us a place to explore them and deal with them in a safe way, or in a safe place, or in a place where questioning can go on, or something like that. So it seems like that it's useful. It's at least useful for me as a place to go to look at those things. William Gibson would be a big influence. Ursula Le Guin. That was a big process of writing this, to be honest, too. Maybe the most fun part was all the reading that I did as I let myself just sort of go right into genre. So I just started reading everything kind of indiscriminately, a lot of science fiction. So I think in the list that I sent you, with those pre-questions, that was like the longest answer. I think I took up 2 pages just with all the stuff that I was reading, and I only wrote that in about a month, and it would have changed every month or whatever. So it's kind of hard to name all of them, as I'm just like racking my brain now. William Gibson, Samuel Delany, Ursula Le Guin, all the greats. Yeah, I don't know yet. It still seems to me to exist in an alternate reality to like straightforward fiction. Straightforward fiction isn't the right term, but I still feel like it rests sort of uneasily on a precipice between poetry and fiction. And I'd like to think that's a strength. It might not appeal to everyone, but I think if you hear that description and that appeals to you, then you'll like this book. And I think that's something that makes it special, is the way it can be in 2 worlds at once, maybe. So yeah, I don't feel like a legitimate fiction writer, but I think that's okay. Yeah. My favorite is a story called Circle of Pigs, and it's about these 4 men who meet at a coffee shop every day, and they all have severe burn scars on their scalps, and they're participating in a ritual which you don't know anything about, and you watch them go through the steps of the ritual, and all sorts of sort of supernatural things happen amidst it. I was picturing kind of like Reservoir Dogs, but with like a supernatural element or whatever. And the ending kind of is reminiscent of Eraserhead. And I found that's a whole other can of worms, that the stories basically are made up of things vaguely remembered from movies and books. It's just sort of like a pastiche of those things. And each of the stories moves through completely different configurations of those things, as I just had a lot of fun seeing what different types of narratives I could write. There's another one called Content Worms that's kind of like a spacey noir, like Alphaville or Blade Runner. Has this old, tired detective character who's tasked with investigating these ether wells that open up in this post-apocalyptic city, and suck people in. And the wells took his wife and child, so he wants to get back at them and get inside and pull them out. And so it follows him through one night of investigating these portals into other dimensions, as just 2 of my favorite examples. The 3D printed kid was made for this purpose: to travel deep within the bottomless pit, to claw at the layers of rocks and dirt, the decomposing remains of other planets, other worlds, to fill up its mouth, nose, ears, and throat, the whole time self-replicating, so that the moment one copy dissolves, another copy will emerge to continue the previous one's descent. Its mission is simple: create a map of the pit's interior, while maintaining a detailed report on its progress in the form of audio-visual recordings, scratchy, black and white magnetic flickers, indexed and recorded for future study by the scientists on the surface of the planet. 13 hours after it began its descent, the 3D printed kid sends up its first broadcast. The images it sends are hard to discern at first. Layers of nonsense, brown, red, and black earth, rendered in grayscale, interrupted by bands of static. As the sequence progresses, these dislocated fragments coalesce and begin to reveal more details about what the kid is seeing and hearing down below. An abstract flipbook-style narrative starts to form, accompanied by the kid's hollow, tin-flecked voice. After 10 more hours of clawing through molten rock, ash, and dirt, the kid finds an opening in the bottomless pit's honeycombed interior. It looks like a baseball field lit from above by green phosphorescent slime. The kid observes its first living creature in this cavernous room. It looks like a potato head with one eye and a crude mouthhole out of which a thin, wet tongue extends like a bean sprout. This creature also sports a host of tiny arachnid legs that teeter around on the floor of the cave like an inky, living donut, kicking up small plumes of dust as it scuttles backwards and forwards. The scientists are pleased with the kid's first discovery. They name this obscure creature Fed because it was feeding off the walls of the cave when the kid first found it. The scientists send down an electrical pulse as a reward. It stimulates the kid's pleasure centers and sends a lovely humming sensation down the length of its plastic spine. This electrical pulse also sends a message to the kid's emotion-to-plastic sense processor that says, "Good job, and keep up the good work." At a press conference, the scientists deliver a briefing on their discoveries that includes this description of their first impressions of the bottomless pit, as conveyed by their digital proximity device of choice, the 3D printed kid. To say there is no light in the bottomless pit is to be overly generous to the word light. Down there, it's just black holes opening into other black holes, and giant rocks that turn their impassive faces towards the void. In the bottomless pit, there are only uncaring objects that persist in relation to one another through sheer presentation of scale. They make no sounds that we can discern. To say they stare, well, yes, they stare, but that would impose a will onto a place where there can be no such thing. Physical laws exist down there, but that's the closest you'll get to language in the bottomless pit. The vocabulary of this language is finite and severely limited. The only terms it includes are turn, collide, explode, spin, burn, and freeze. You could say that, placed alongside one another, these terms represent a sort of grammar, and that this grammar adds up to a sort of sentence, but it's a sentence that reveals nothing because it comes from nowhere and goes nowhere, and besides, there is no one there to write it, and there is no one there to read it. The 3D printed kid breaches another layer of the pit about 8 weeks after it began its descent. It finds itself in a large, vaulted cave, packed with identical bald humanoids, all speaking or singing in similar monotone voices. There's no organization to their speaking and singing voices, not one that the scientists can discern at least. But under closer scrutiny, there seems to be a kind of incidental syncopation that arises in the interplay between the bald humanoids' voices. And it sounds as though they're all reading from a common liturgy, though all out of order and out of sync with each other. The bald humanoids drone and bellow under the vaulted roof of the cave. Sometimes in unison, other times one of them performs a high-pitched solo while the others stay quiet or continue murmuring deep bass tones in the dark. On the surface of the planet, the scientists are perplexed by the kid's newest discovery. They call in linguists and cryptographers to analyze this foreign language in order to determine whether or not it contains within it any decipherable codes or some clues that might give them a deeper understanding of how the choir works or of the bottomless pit itself. While the scientists discuss the implications of this new find, the kid walks around recording videos and taking core samples until it finds a single bald humanoid separated from the rest of the choir, crouched over in a dark corner of the cave, transcribing by hand the words and phrases being spoken and sung out loud into an enormous leather-bound book. This infernal scribe is sitting severely hunched over and has huge magnifying glasses attached to their scalp, positioned in front of their eyes. The scribe's wrinkled eyes bulge and strain, but there's something serene and measured about how they conduct themselves as well. The scribe's fingers are slender and nimble as they flip through the tissue-thin paper of the large book with expert skill. To the scientists, it looks as though the scribe is compiling some sort of master list of the words and phrases being spoken and sung. The scribe also seems to be arranging these words in some logical order, in longhand and in real time, and it must be, the scientists guess, that the scribe can hold a very long string of words and phrases in their head as they write them down, all the while making note of the ones being spoken into the cold air of the cave and straining their eyes. The team of linguists back on the surface ask the kid to get a closer look at the book. At first, the scribe doesn't seem to take any notice as the kid creeps closer to get a better view of the pages. The scribe can't do much more than adjust the magnifying glasses in front of their bloodshot eyes and reach for another piece of charcoal as the words and songs explode all around them in the cave. The scribe moves too quickly through the pages of the book for the scientists to follow along. The linguists suspect there's a latent grammar and syntax present in the scribe's transcription, but they need a copy of the book to confirm it. The scientists send down a direct order for the kid to confiscate the book so it can make a detailed copy. But the kid does not comply. Instead, it just stares analytically at the top of the scribe's head. Veins pump furiously beneath the surface of the scalp as they strain to concentrate, transcribe, order, and not miss a word. The scientists lose their collective patience. They send down a barrage of violent electronic pulses that trigger the kid's pain centers, causing some of its more benign circuits to melt and drip out its ears and mouth onto the ground. The melting plastic forms pink and gray puddles on the floor of the cave, and the kid feels unbearable pain and humiliation for the first time as it reels around, trying to stop the melting plastic from gushing out of its mouth. The kid has no choice but to comply with the order, and when it reaches down in slow motion, its perfectly formed synthetic hands cross the space between the scribe's glasses and the spot where their charcoal pencil is about to touch the sacred pages of the book. And the scribe stops writing, the bald humanoids stop chanting, and the cave becomes murderously quiet.